The Dallas Cowboys had 9 first or second team All-Pro selections in 2023, but who will be next in 2024? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we're taking a look at 3 players who could be first-time Pro Bowl or All-Pro selections for the Cowboys in 2024. And Landon, let's start with a very obvious and clear answer here. Let's talk about Osa Odighizuwa. What would he need to do to become an All-Pro player this year?
I think he's kind of been on the precipice last season. He had a really great season last year. His sack totals aren't, enormous. And I think that's kind of a lot what you see with the Pro Bowl voters and that sort of thing. But with All Pro, I mean, usually you're getting a more kind of advanced eyes on these selections and people that are watching film. And it's hard to argue against what Osa Odighizuwa has done, especially these last 2 seasons for the Cowboys. I mean, he's basically been the sole interior force. I mean, you put up the advanced numbers right here. It kind of shows he's really when you grade him out like through tape and see how disruptive he is. He does a lot of creation and a lot of cleanup for some of the other guys who get a lot more accolades than he does on this defense. I think that's what you see right here.
Yeah, we saw Osa turn into a really well-balanced player this year. He wasn't just an upfield penetrator, pass rusher player. He was everything. Here are some of the numbers courtesy of Pro Football Focus from last year. 88th percentile pass rush grade, 87th percentile pass rush win rate, 91st percentile no play action grade, 78th percentile run defense grade, 60th percentile run stop percentage. I mean, all of those numbers across the board, Landon, are all pro numbers, right? Like if you can be above the 50th percentile in all those categories, you're going to be fine. But I think you mentioned it at the top. It's like Osa is already an all-pro caliber player. But for him to actually be named an all-pro player, it's probably the sack totals. And I know sack totals are really messy and they can be fluky. But if he has just one of those random years where it's 9.5 sacks and the Cowboys defense continues to be really good, he's probably going to make it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? Is that you feel like a lot of his stats have been kind of disrupted by the fact that he plays next to, Micah Parsons, who's going to get his sacks. And if you're measuring, we talk about all the time, like disruption is production, right? But ultimately, if you're trying to get stats, you need production. You need to be recognized. So I think that his level of play is at where it needs to be in order to get that All-Pro accolade. I think what he needs is a little bit of the ball to bounce correctly so that he can get some of these sacks that, maybe ended up with somebody else, or just to kind of, put some better numbers on the board than what he's done. And again, this isn't from a lack of effort. Like the Cowboys defense has been extremely good, and he's been a part of one of the top sacking defenses and turnover defenses in the league for the last few years. I think what it is that, instead of him only getting a half sack because Parsons showed up, last second to kind of take his half, you hope that he gets the full sack, and just maybe, if he only had, I think, 3 sacks last year. And I know that it seems like a tall order, but I think he could easily double it with the similar effort that he had last year, right?
I mean, the pass rush win rate suggests that he should be getting a lot more than whatever his sack total was last year. So he's really close. He just hasn't been the one that's been finishing the sacks. I mean, Micah Parsons, I think Parsons is even a great example of, I think he's had like 13.5 sacks in each of the last 3 years. And he's always been at the very top of the pass rush win rate, right? It's just being actually able to bring down the quarterback, players like Dorrance Armstrong and Dante Fowler have benefited from all these
That's
other
right.
guys creating quick pressure, right? So just have one of those fluky years where he gets 8.5, 9 sacks, and he'll be fine. The other thing I wanted to mention, Landon, is he's only 25. Like
Yeah.
typically defensive tackles is a position where we see the best play from these guys usually happen either at the end of the rookie deal or sometimes on their second deal. I think of like somebody like Justin Matabuke, who just got paid an outrageous sum of money by the Ravens. He broke out in year 4. That happened to Christian Wilkins for the Dolphins, who now plays for the Raiders, had the same thing happen. Even Quinnen Williams, who was, I think, the 3rd overall pick in 2019.
Yeah.
He didn't have first real breakout season until I think it was the 2022 year, right? So that would have been his 4th year in the league. I wouldn't be surprised to see Osa take another big step this season.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. I think, he has everything that it takes to be that top end defensive tackle. The Cowboys are in a tough spot with Osa because, he's clearly going into a contract year. I think he's going to have a great season. And he plays a position in which, unlike almost any other position on this team, he is the sole shining light in that room, right? Like there isn't really a lot of other known quantities for the defensive tackle position.
Well, let me ask you this. Is the gap between like CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks bigger than the gap between like Osa and the next best defensive tackle? Because I would argue, no, probably not. Right?
I don't think it is. No, I think the difference, the gap between Osa and the second defensive tackle is pretty wide. So, yeah, and I do think that the Cowboys are already dealing with several contract situations, as we've been talking about for seemingly forever. It does feel like Osa is a guy that should be prioritized, and you hope that they'll find a way to kind of figure all that out. But he's the name that we kind of have forgotten, or we haven't really mentioned as far as contract stuff during this offseason. But I'm hoping pretty seriously that the Cowboys are keeping their powder dry enough that they should be able to fit Osa under as well. Because I think he deserves a contract, and if he doesn't get it here, he's going to get big money someplace else. That's for sure.
Really quickly, before we move on to our other 2 names here that we believe could have all pro seasons, how do you think Osa fits a Mike Zimmer defense? Because obviously he fit a Dan Quinn defense well, but do you think he's going to fit Zimmer, who maybe prioritizes the run a little bit more?
Well, I think you said it, right? Like he did a great job this last season of playing both sides of the ball, playing the pass and playing the run. So I think that sort of two-way player would fit great inside of a Zimmer defense. I mean, I think.
So you're not concerned?
No, I'm not concerned. You think back, some of the defensive tackles that they've had on those different Zimmer defenses, and he's had penetrating defensive tackles at points. That hasn't always been his, MO. But he's had guys that were, more athletic than big and that would get upfield and attack inside. And I think he knows how to use those guys. And again, I think it would be one thing if he was purely a penetrator pass rusher type, like, he like every other, 6'2", 280-pound 3 technique in the league. But the difference is that he plays much bigger than that. He plays much stronger. He plays with a level of leverage. And I think that's what helped him break out early, in his career versus other guys, right? He understands leverage better than I think a lot of these defensive tackles coming out because he had a huge wrestling background. So I do think that he will be able to function at a high level inside the Zim defense. Simply because he has the ability to play the run and the pass, equally well.
All right, let's move on to a player on offense that is set to have a massive season. We'll get to Jake Ferguson next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and so much more. And you can bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 that you can use to bet on everything from the Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. Listen, us Mavs fans are here. We're hoping that we don't have that this isn't the last NBA Finals game. Just give us one more home game. But I do like Jaylen Brown to win the Finals MVP. He's been the most consistent player so far. But if you believe that the Mavs are going to pull off the upset, the first team ever to come back from a 3-0 deficit in the NBA playoffs, go check out those lines right now on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that unnecessary screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, we are discussing 3 players that could be all-pro selections for the first time in their NFL careers this year with the Cowboys. Atlanta, I wanted to mention Jake Ferguson, who had a breakout season in year 2. He's going into year 3 with the Cowboys, pretty clearly the second most reliable option in the passing attack. And with the tight end position being such a touchdown dependent award when it comes to the all-pro selections, I could just see a scenario playing out where Jake Ferguson leads this team in touchdowns and all of a sudden we're giving him legit all-pro consideration.
Yeah, I mean, I think, let's first kind of look at his journey because I think it's been interesting. He came in his rookie year. He got, he earned a lot of targets. And, I think he ended up with 22 targets his rookie year and was able to convert it. And I think ended up with close to 200 yards receiving. And so we go into the next year, right? And we're hoping that he can cobble together, some production with the other guys that are in the room that we also really liked, and Hendershot, obviously. And then we were still learning about Schoonmaker as he got drafted. And then we get into the regular season and Fergie just takes off. He just has clearly taken a huge step. It ends up getting close to almost 800 yards receiving during the regular season, and seemingly was getting better as the season was going on, right? He did suffer from some drops at different points. I think that's one area where he can improve a little bit. But I think as you saw, as the season game went on, he became more of a trusted target, even more of a trusted target to Dak. More of a reliable, weapon in the offense that they could, attack the seam with. And I think that, you mentioned it, even though that the playoff game was obviously terrible, the one shining bright spot, it's hard to argue, was Jake Ferguson. I had almost 100 yards receiving and 3 touchdowns. So, and obviously that's, some garbage time or whatever. But I think the point is that, he really took the step last year and pointed his arrow in the right direction, and then kind of did never take his foot off the gas and continued to just get better and better and better, and showed you a knack for breaking tackles and taking the ball once he has in his hands and being a weapon with it, almost sort of Kittle-ish in that sense, right? So I think that we've seen a guy that is very clearly on a trajectory towards breaking out. I don't think that all pro is outrageously outside of the
let me give you the numbers. Last year, Sam Laporta was a second team all pro selection. He had 889 yards and 10 touchdowns. Okay. So that averages out, Landon, to about 52 receiving yards a game. I mean, I think Jake Ferguson can do that. I don't think it's all that unrealistic. He wasn't that far off last year, had 761 yards. And remember, there were several games where the Cowboys just kind of rested their starters in the fourth quarter. Like they didn't even play a snap. There was also week 1, they hardly threw the ball at all in the second half because they were up by 40 points against the Giants. So if there's some regression on defense and maybe the Cowboys have to throw the ball a little bit more, I could see that. He scored 5 touchdowns in the regular season, 3 in the postseason. I just don't think it's that big of a leap to think that he could be 200 yards better and double his touchdown production.
Yeah, and again, all pro voters are savvy voters, right? They're guys that watch film usually. This is a team that's going to run the ball this year for sure, and I think that he's going to be a big part of that as well. Just being a kind of point of attack blocker. He's a solid run blocker, and so I think if he can continue to improve his receiving numbers and efficiency, and then kind of continue to go along the trajectory that he has as a run blocker, I think the All-Pro voters are definitely going to take notice. And he's already somebody that I think is on their radar.
Correct.
Him and Laporta are really kind of the two young and up-and-coming tight ends in this league at this point, where, honestly, if you look around the landscape of the league, there aren't a ton of great young tight ends right now. There's only probably 2 or 3 of them, and a handful of older guys that are kind of getting a little bit long in the tooth. So it feels like Laporta and Ferguson are both kind of on the precipice of taking that mantle of the best tight ends in football from kind of an older crew that's aging out.
And just to be clear, I like Sam Laporta as a prospect better than Jake Ferguson. He's a better athlete. He had a better rookie season. But you look at the Lions, they've got a lot of other weapons that they can throw to. I mean, obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown was an all-pro player last year. Yep. They drafted Jameson Williams. They have Jahmyr Gibbs. Like, they just have more talent at the pass catcher position compared to Dallas. So it wouldn't be a surprise if Ferguson's numbers were significantly better this year. Not saying he's a better player, but they just had better numbers. And that is what a lot of times the All-Pro voters go off of. And I also want to mention, here's some of the advanced stats from Ferguson last year from Pro Football Focus. 86th percentile receiving grade, 88th percentile zone grade, 72nd percentile yards per route run, 57th percentile in contested catch percentage, and 80th percentile yards after catch per reception. That's the one that really sticks out to me, Landon. You make plays after the catch, you're typically going to be a good tight end. But you're right. Like, I remember talking about this all year with you. Like, there was a lot of opportunities last year where I don't know if we would consider it a drop for Jake Ferguson, but where Dak would put the ball on him and he wasn't able to come down with the catch. And a lot of times that would have either been a big gain or a touchdown. And I think him improving his grip strength and being able to reel in some of those more, some of those contested catches could be the difference from him being a Pro Bowl selection in 2024 versus an All-Pro selection.
Yeah, and again, I don't think I mentioned that he had 5 drops last year. Those are not necessarily what I'm referring to with those kind of contested catch situations, because those aren't necessarily drops, right? It's a drops are when you like concentration drop sort of situation. If he can, obviously he needs to improve those. But on top of that, if he's able to kind of improve the contested catch situations, just better gain his focus, keep his focus when he gets contact at the top of the arc, when he's going up, grip strength, as you mentioned. I think, he probably adds another, probably 100 yards in receiving. I could think of like 3 or 4 different 20+ yard catches where he had both hands on the ball above his head and couldn't just quite secure it on the way to the ground. So, and again, I'll add one more thing that I think will add to his campaign. Dak is, if not the best, then definitely the top 3 best seam throwers in all of football. And I think that Jake is going to run that route a lot and did it a lot last year. And because Dak likes to throw that ball, likes to throw that seam ball, I imagine you're going to see a lot of Jake Ferguson targeting at different points in the game. So he's going to get lots of opportunity to make an All-Pro.
So Osa Odighizuwa and Jake Ferguson, those were the clear and obvious names to be the next All-Pro selection. But let's dive a little bit further, Lena. Let's pick a real dark horse that could make that list in 2024 next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Every day, it's just a couple of show notes real quick. Lena and I will be doing some 3 and 4 episode weeks over the next couple of weeks as we get you ready for training camp, which will start, was it like last week of July? I think they report to Oxnard.
I think they maybe start 2 weeks before, right? I think it started early this year, but
I just can't wait for
trying to get my schedule ready.
I know. I'm just so excited for Jerry Jones to call it Oxnard again. I can't wait.
Oxnard.
So be on the lookout for that. We'll also have some special guests for you over the next couple of weeks. So again, be on the lookout for that. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcast. But Landon, let's finish up today's show by discussing one real dark horse to be an All-Pro selection. This player hasn't even taken a snap for the Cowboys yet, but I won't be surprised if DeMarvion Overshown is a first-team All-Pro selection for the Cowboys in 2024. What do you think?
I mean, listen, we're trying to predict, and what have I always said about, especially the last few seasons? What have I always said about the NFL season? It is almost impossible to predict. Like the things that happen, you could never have imagined. There's been so many times when players that we have written off, suddenly become incredible, and players that we were certain were going to be incredible, basically fell off a cliff and just weren't able to kind of reproduce the way that they were previously. DeMarvion Overshown, like say what you want about the position and about the ability of young players to have an impact in the position, because I think that those are things that are way in his favor a little bit. But there's just something about this kid, I think that much is clear. He's affecting the other people that are around him to the point where they mention him all the time. The coaches mention him all the time. And even last year in training camp, when he was able to go and play, clearly he was still kind of learning the position, that he wasn't really a linebacker very much. He was kind of a linebacker in college. So this was sort of a position change for him. Right. He immediately looked like he belonged. He immediately looked like he was one of the better athletes in the field. And I think that is the kind of thing that, for someone who's been going to training camp for a long time, that's the kind of thing you look for with these guys, right? Like, not only do they look good, but do they look like they have been playing, NFL football for a long time? Do they look like they belong, right? Like they're as fast and as talented as the rest of these guys. Not only was he doing that, but, he got in, and the second and third team was clearly the best player on either side of the ball on the second and third team, gets in with the first team, and he's making plays still as a first team player. Again, playing a new position as a rookie. So those are the kind of breadcrumbs, right, that you look for, the kind of evidence to see exactly. It's the people talk about how you can look at a puppy's paws, right, and tell like by their paws how big they're going to be. He's got really big paws. You can tell that he's going to be growing into something special. I think a lot of it is between his ears, but I also think that he has some a physical ability that is also rare. And I'm excited to see what he looks like on the training camp field. Obviously, we are super projecting here.
That's okay.
But yeah, I mean, like we said, that is not so. There's barely anything that you could tell me that's so outrageous that I won't believe it could happen in an NFL season. I certainly won't be surprised if this happens with Overshown.
I just think he's a really good fit in Mike Zimmer's defense as well, right? Like, he's going to be able to take those deep drops in the cover two if they want him to do that. He can run sideline to sideline. I think he's also, I mean, we saw it at Texas. Like, I think he's going to be an amazing blitzer from the A gap. And there's just a lot of opportunity here, right? Like, we think Eric Kendricks is going to wear the green dot, but that weak side linebacker spot, he's competing with who? I mean, who?
Basically.
I mean, maybe. I almost wonder if Clark won't be Eric Kendricks' primary backup, but we'll see. Like, I just think there's a good chance that he steps in right away. He's a starter. He leads this team in tackles. He creates a bunch of splash plays. And frankly, if you look at the linebackers, like across the NFL, there's only a couple of them that are like really well established and good. There's Fred Warner. There's Roquan Smith. Matt Milano is banged up, but he's a very good player when he's healthy. Like, of all the positions that we talked about, like, this one has the least amount of top end talent. And it's probably the one spot where we could see somebody rise up and take it, kind of like the way Quincy Williams did for the Jets last year. Somebody who was a relatively no-name player goes ahead and makes the first team All-Pro in his first full year as a starter. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens with Overshown.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot like running back in the sense that it can tend to be a young man's game, right? Until there are obviously special players that kind of transcend that. Fred Warner obviously being the best case of that now. But yeah, I mean, I think it is a lot more wide open than a lot of other positions as far as, a pathway to that sort of accolade, right? So, and I also think that linebacker play can be kind of up and down from year to year. Like, if you're not, unless you're like, Fred Warner or Milano, those guys kind of have a level of consistency, but even then, like, it's a position that, there is a lot of ups and downs, and bumps and bruises can affect it too. Injuries can really wear down a player and have an effect on his play. So it's a young man's game in a lot of ways at linebacker at the top. So if Overshown is able to get in there, obviously earn the spot, and then kind of play at the level that we expect him to and stay healthy, I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunity, like you said, to put up big numbers, not only tackle numbers, but tackle for loss, sack numbers, because he is going to be used as a blitzer and he's going to be used kind of in a utility way. I think there is a chance for Overshown to kind of be in a featured role in this defense simply because of the position he plays and the athleticism that he possesses that maybe some of the rest of the linebackers in that group don't quite have.
I kind of feel like Overshown's development would be like a harbinger for the Cowboys' entire defense. Like if he plays really well in training camp and in the preseason, and we're just getting a steady drumbeat of solid news, I'm going to feel really good about the Cowboys defense because that and maybe the one technique spot are arguably their two biggest weaknesses going into the year. But if it just sounds like Overshown's taking that job and he's a future superstar, all of a sudden I feel great about the Cowboys defense this year. So I'm really invested in the second year player. I can't wait. We're about a month and a half away from actually seeing him on the practice field. I'm so excited.
Yeah, it's exciting, and it was really unfortunate, obviously, what happened to him. Not only because it's he's a rookie and it's an injury, but because of all the things that I just talked about before. That he was really showing out and showing that he belonged on there, and clearly had a bright future. And of course, it's always the worst when you see those kind of players, those ones that the Raymond Radaways that show you a bunch and then get all the way through the end of training camp and end up getting hurt and it kind of all falling apart. So the difference, obviously, that Overshown has a little bit more of a runway to kind of allow for injury.
Yes,
he being a draft pick, that obviously helps things out. So he's going to come back better than ever. Obviously, all the reports have been incredibly positive on his recovery and that he's ahead of schedule, which again portends the type of work ethic that is required to become an all-pro. So yeah, I'm definitely excited not only to see how he looks coming off an injury, but how he has developed as a linebacker and how he looks inside the rest of the group.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Every day, just go check out the channel on YouTube. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.